Days at the Morisaki Bookshop, Part 2. Chapter 3. When night fell, I fought off Momoko's attempts to make me stay longer, said goodbye, and left the bookshop. I wandered along the narrow back streets on my way to the train station. The night was cool, with just a slight chill in the air. As I passed beneath the streetlights, the shadows I cast on the asphalt grew longer. As I reached the Savour, my feet stopped on their own. Seeing the orange light of its sign shining in the lonely street at night, I was like Pavlov's dog. It triggered a sudden urge to drink coffee. When I looked at my watch, it was just a little after 8. I opened the door. It was like something was pulling me inside. The coffee shop was as lively as it always was, even at this time of night. From the entrance, I could hear the sound of gentle piano music, mixed with the lively conversations of the other customers. Then I spotted a familiar figure sitting at the counter. Seeing that short and stout body and smooth bald head from behind, I knew it could only be Sabu. He was deep in conversation with the owner about something or other. When he noticed me, he waved and called for me to come over and sit beside him. The owner greeted me with his usual smile as I sat down next to Sabu. "Hey, Takako, it's good to see you back." Just as I was about to smile at him, Sabu cut in, saying, "Takako, you've got to smile more. Try to be a little friendly. That's why you're not popular with the guys." I told him it was none of his business. Sabu giggled as if something were funny. "But you came at the right moment," he said. "We were just talking about all of you. Momoko came back, right? Satoru's playing it cool. Why didn't he tell me about it?" You could hear the obvious curiosity in his voice. "Sabu, let's not pry too much," the owner said, reprimanding him. "Why? What's the big deal? Besides, aren't you the one who told me about it? You said Momoko had come back," Sabu said, pretending to sulk. There's absolutely nothing cute about an old man pretending to sulk. The only cute thing at the Savour was my friend Tomo, who used to work here part-time. Unfortunately, she'd finished grad school and gotten a job, so she was no longer at the coffee shop. From what I heard, however, she and Takano were keeping up their friendship. Sabu was still complaining as the owner gently placed my coffee in front of me. "Last night, Sabu wandered in and I let it slip," the owner said, sounding apologetic. His eyes, on the other hand, showed he was curious to know more. "The two of you both knew Momoko before, right?" "Naturally. How many years do you think I've been hanging around this neighborhood?" Sabu said, sounding quite proud of himself. "Mr. Morisaki was married before. It doesn't fit my image of him." At some point, Takano had come out of the kitchen carrying plates and towels in both hands, and he eagerly joined the conversation. "That's right," Sabu said. "You never knew. He's really sort of a widower, isn't he? But when he was young, those two used to make out in front of everyone. It was quite a show, wasn't it?" "There was a bit of that, I guess," the owner said. "At any rate, Momoko is still beautiful, isn't she? When she came in, she said, 'It makes me so happy to have your coffee after all this time.' She looked like she was doing really well." "Oh, you're a soft touch. She just wanted to flatter you. If you ask me, she suddenly comes home after being missing for years. She'd better have more than a few jokes. Satoru should run her off straight away. If my wife tried that, I'd knock her down." As he talked, Sabu worked himself up to such a state of excitement that his face turned all red like an octopus. "Hold on now, Sabu. You sound so aggressive. But whenever your wife tries to make you get rid of some books, aren't you the one begging her in tears?" When we heard that, Takano and I both burst out laughing. Hey, shut up! What are you laughing about, Takano? Get back to work." Sorry. Takano fled to the back in a hurry as Sabu threw a towel at him. "If you're ticked off, don't take it out on my staff," the owner said with an exasperated look on his face. "Aren't you the one who normally bullies him?" "That I do out of love, the owner said earnestly, "whereas the feeling your wife inspires in you is fear. You've always been a real jerk, haven't you?" "Fine, I'm angry, I'm pissed." "Okay, How about I have some stern words with Momoko for Satoru? We know that Nincompoop will never be able to say anything. Hey now, stop butting into other people's business. The owner was chiding Sabu, even though he was the one who got Sabu riled up in the first place. Wow, this neighborhood definitely attracts its share of weirdos. The thought made me smile, but then Sabu took aim at me. Takako, quit smirking there by yourself. It's unpleasant. Right after this, there was another little development at the Saveur. Around 9, Sabu stopped making a fuss and went home, probably because if he didn't get back early, his wife would have let him have it. So I moved to sit at a table. As the night wore on, there were only a few customers left. I ordered another coffee and promptly took the book I'd been reading from my bag and opened it up to my page. Then I noticed something. There was someone I recognized sitting by the window. He was a slim man in his late 20s. He wore a pale blue shirt with grey pants. His hair was cut short and neatly trimmed. There was nothing flashy about him, but there was something appealing about how neat he was. He was staring out the window absent-mindedly, with a half-read paperback lying face down on the table. He looked as if he were waiting for someone. Who was he? As I stared at him, thinking this over, he suddenly turned to me, as if he'd noticed I was looking at him. When our eyes met, we both looked surprised. He looked at me and then at the paperback I was holding, then again back and forth as if he were comparing the two. Then he nodded as if he'd understood and quietly said, "Hello." Hearing his voice, I finally remembered where I'd met him before. How could I have forgotten? He was someone I'd dealt with many times at the Morisaki Bookshop, because we were inundated with extremely idiosyncratic regulars, with Sabu chief among them. It was harder for someone a bit more withdrawn like him to make a strong impression. So it just took me a moment to remember him. I was flustered as I returned his greeting, embarrassed about having stared at him so shamelessly. "Nice to see you. It's been a while," I said and quickly bowed, but he smiled and said, "Oh, there's no need to be so formal." He had a nice smile that put you at ease. Right at that moment, the waitress arrived at my table, carrying my coffee on her tray. She was standing directly between the two of us and seemed confused about what to do in the situation. I got caught up in it too and started feeling flustered. Seeing this, he shyly offered an invitation. "Would you like to sit here?" "Would you by any chance be waiting for someone?" I asked hesitantly. "Not especially at the moment," he replied. Hearing this, the waitress regained her confidence and her smile. "In that case, here it is," she said, quickly placing my coffee in front of his seat. To which I responded, "I guess I'll sit here then," as I moved to the seat across from him. In times like this, I tend to get sort of carried away. He had just been kind enough to invite me over. It wasn't that he especially wanted to talk to me. Now I was interrupting his alone time. Once I started thinking this way, I felt I needed to apologize. When I reached my new seat, the waitress told us to take our time. Then she bowed and left us. We watched her walk away before we turned to face each other again. Silence. "Well, this is awkward," I thought as I shifted in my seat. Then he started to laugh to himself quietly. I stared at him blankly. "Sorry," he said. "This sort of feels like a setup for an arranged marriage." The smile on his face won me over and I burst out laughing. "We haven't properly introduced ourselves," he said, clearing his throat. "My name is Akira Wada." He said he worked at a publishing company nearby that mostly dealt in textbooks and teaching materials. When I introduced myself, he said, "That's right, Takako. I remember the cheerful owner of the shop was always yelling out Takako, 'Takako,' in a loud voice." He nodded again and again as he laughed. My face turned red. "Ah, that would be my uncle," I murmured. "Really, your uncle? It must be great to have a relative who runs a used bookshop," Wada exclaimed, sounding genuinely jealous. "But you're no longer working at the shop." "Yeah, for one reason or another, I ended up staying there for a while and working at the shop in exchange for room and board. I guess you could say I was there long enough to recharge my batteries." Recharge your batteries? At the shop? Yes. I like that. Recharge your batteries, Wada exclaimed again. But to get to do it at a used bookshop, now that sounds luxurious. Oh man, I'm jealous. Then he went on what was almost a little monologue about how if it had been him, he would have never left. He would have just kept on recharging his batteries forever. Somehow the idea of living at a used bookshop seemed to ignite something within him. He was turning out to be a surprisingly humorous guy. "Oh, how's your girlfriend doing?" I asked. "I used to see you together a lot." He was still oohing and ahhing about living in a bookstore when I remembered her. Wada used to come to the shop by himself for the most part, but occasionally he brought a girl with him. She was slim and tall like him, and the two of them looked good together, but she didn't seem especially interested in books. Wada would be carefully examining the books with this earnest expression on his face while she was off on her own, looking bored. When she finally got tired of waiting for him, she'd get miffed and say, "Still not done yet?" And he would desperately apologize. "Sorry, just a little longer." Sabu used to say, "Going to a used bookshop as a couple is a—" I don't think it really matters whether you know a lot about books or not. That said, I don't know that much myself. But I think what matters far more with a book is how it affects you. You think so? My uncle always says something like that. You were always behind the counter in the back, lost in your book. It used to make me curious about what on earth you could be reading. Really? I'm so sorry, I was a terrible employee. No, that's not what I meant, Wada said, and he looked at me like he was trying to remember something. You just fit in so well in the store that I wanted to let you be. It was almost like that moment when you're watching a butterfly coming out of its chrysalis, and you're holding your breath, and you want to keep on watching. I guess you left a big impression on me. That's why when I saw you there a second ago with a book in your hand, I remembered you right away. I said, "It's the woman from that bookshop." The thought of being seen like that by someone I didn't know left me feeling terribly embarrassed. But in those days, I really was like a butterfly waiting patiently to come out of its chrysalis. As I turned page after page, I was waiting for my chance to take flight, so it might not be out of the question that Wada could sense that when he looked at me. I'm not entirely sure, though, that I've learned to fly that well. If I'd never gone to the shop, I'd still be living my life in a daze. I met so many people there, and I learned so many things. And, of course, there were all of the books I discovered. I feel like I finally learned to see something a tiny bit valuable within myself. That's why I know that I'll never forget the days I spent at the bookshop. Although this was the first time I'd ever really spoken to him, the words came pouring out of my mouth with such force I couldn't help myself. Wada nodded along as he listened with a look of admiration on his face. To think that all that drama was going on while I knew nothing about it. Man, oh man. He might have been serious, but his way of putting it was oddly funny. It was also strange. It felt like we'd been friends forever, like I could talk to him for hours. When Wada seemed like he was listening to me seriously, he'd come out with something funny and make me laugh. That's how we ended up talking for such a long time. When I happened to glance at the clock on the wall, it was already almost 11 o'clock. Preposterous idea. But watching the back and forth between them gave you a sense of how close they were. I thought it was charming. Oh, I remember those days. The tone of his voice dropped in response to my question. "I'm afraid I've been dumped," he added, and laughed dryly. Then he got a rather distant look in his eye. "I'm sorry," I apologized right away. I was ready to throw myself at his feet. No, I don't mind at all," Wada said, trying not to make a big deal of it, but still with that distant look in his eye. So, in our first talk, I'd gone and stepped on a landmine. I was in a colossal panic. I was searching desperately for a new topic to talk about when my gaze stopped at the book lying on the table. "What is it you're reading there?" "Ah, it's a book called Up the Hill. Actually, I think I got it from the 100 yen section at Morisaki Bookshop." Wada picked up the book and showed it to me. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief that we'd moved on from the last topic. Oh, I don't know it. Is it a good book? It's hard to say, actually. It's kind of one of those tragic love stories. The author is a guy who had this one book and ended up dying in obscurity. When you read it, the writing can be clumsy, and there are a lot of places where it feels like it's missing something. But there's something about it that fascinates me. I've read it around 5 times already. As he talked, he was staring at the oil painting of a road in the hills on the book jacket. There was something tender in the loving way he looked at the book that ended up making me want to read it. Really? 5 times? Maybe I should check it out. I'm not sure I can really recommend it. What are you reading, Takako? When I took the book out of my bag, he said, "Oh, Taruho Inagaki, he's great." He looked at me with a glint in his eye. I guess I should have known from how often he came to the store that he knew much more about books than I did. Even though I worked at a bookshop, I don't know all that much about books. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface.